A case that defies reason until the answer clicks. Welcome to Cafe Echoes. I am your host, Silas Graves. Share in the comments where your curiosity brings you from. Your thoughts make these tales come alive. Now the mystery begins. The affair began, as so many affairs do, with a room that was too perfect. It was the morning after Lady Rosalind Harcourt's Valentine soirée, an affair of pale roses, discreet laughter, and the kind of champagne that appeared to pour itself in Mayfair. The drawing-room of Harcourt House still wore the remnants of elegance, a silver salver holding the last curled lemon peels, a vase of lilies beginning to droop with the fatigue of beauty, and the faintest perfume of cigar smoke where no gentleman would ever admit to having smoked. Captain Hastings and I had come at the urgent request of Lady Rosalind herself. She met us at the foot of the broad staircase, a tall woman whose composure had been drilled into her by birth and perfected by necessity. Yet even she, trained for crisis in the manner of the fashionable world by denying it, could not entirely conceal the tremor in her hands. "Hercule Poirot," she said, and the relief that softened her voice was almost indecent in its honesty. "Thank God! It is absurd. It cannot be." Poirot bowed, immaculate as ever, his moustaches lifted to a point of defiance against disorder. "Madame, when people say to me, 'It cannot be,' it is generally at that moment that it is." She led us through a corridor lined with portraits of Harcourt, who had never imagined themselves powerless. At the end, a door stood ajar. But two men were in the room beyond. Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, looking grimly pleased to have found his way into the affairs of the upper crust, and a thin, pale young man with spectacles who hovered like a guilty thought. On the carpet, near the fireplace, lay a figure that turned my stomach before my mind could frame it. Sir Alister Vale, financier, collector, and last night's most glittering guest, was sprawled as if he had lain down to admire the Persian rug and simply forgotten to rise. His evening clothes were still flawless. A single black glove rested in the curve of his fingers. His head was turned slightly to the left, his face composed, almost faintly surprised. But there was no blood. That was the first unreasoning shock. One expects blood. One expects violence to announce itself with a vulgar flourish. Yet Sir Alister's white shirt front was untouched. The skin of his throat bore no bruise. Even his hair, painstakingly arranged, had not been disturbed. "Dead?" I asked, though the question was foolish. "Dead," said Japp, "as a nail in a coffin. Doctor's been and gone. Heart stopped somewhere between midnight and 1. No sign of struggle, no poison found, at least none of the usual, no wound, nothing missing, and yet—" He looked at Poirot, annoyed with the world for refusing to present a tidy solution. "And yet," Poirot murmured, stepping nearer without haste, "we have a crime." Lady Rosalind's voice came from behind us, strained but controlled. "Something is missing, Monsieur Poirot. That is why I sent for you. Something that cannot be missing." Poirot's eyes flicked, quick as a needle. "Ah!" She moved to the mantelpiece. There stood a framed niche lined in velvet, a kind of small shrine in wood and gold. It was empty. "The Harcourt star," she said, "a diamond that has been in my family for 2 centuries. Sir Alister was to broker its sale, quietly, discreetly. Only a handful of us knew it was even in the house. Last night, before supper, I saw it there. This morning, it is gone." Japp made an impatient sound. "So there you have it, a theft, and the thief took the opportunity to do away with Vale as well. Only—" He spread his hands, frustrated. "Only it doesn't fit. If he was killed for the diamond, why is it not on him? If he stole it, why kill him? And if someone killed him, why leave him dressed like that, looking as if he died politely?" Poirot did not answer at once. He stood a moment, hands behind his back, studying the room as if it were a painting hung slightly crooked. The study was a gentleman's stage set, mahogany desk, leather chairs, a decanter of brandy, a half-emptied glass, a small pile of letters weighted by a bronze paper knife. The curtains were drawn, but the morning light slipped in at the edges in thin, accusing lines. Everything appeared, how shall I say it, arranged. Not merely neat, but arranged, as though someone had tried to make disorder look like order. Poirot's gaze rested on the dead man's hands, then on the glove. His nostrils flared faintly as if scenting an idea. "Tell me, Jap," he said softly. "You have searched the body?" "Of course. Pockets, shoes, everywhere. Nothing. No jewel, no weapon, no note, not even a blasted handkerchief out of place." "And the door?" "Locked from the inside," Jap said promptly.
Key in the lock. Footman heard a thump around 12:30, but thought it was a chair. No one went in until morning, when Lady Rosalind's maid came to fetch her mistress's shawl." "A locked room," Hastings breathed, my old excitement stirring despite the grimness. "Then it must be—" Poirot raised a finger. "Non, mon ami, it must be nothing until we have used the little grey cells." The thin young man with spectacles cleared his throat. "If I may, Inspector, Lady Rosalind?" He looked about as though seeking permission to exist. "I am Mr. Edwin Lorne, Lady Rosalind's secretary. I handled the correspondence with Sir Alistair. There is something you should know." Lady Rosalind turned sharply. "Edwin! Not now!" Poirot's eyes, however, had already fastened upon him. "But yes, now. It is always now, monsieur. The truth does not enjoy waiting." Edwin Lorne swallowed. "Sir Alistair told me yesterday afternoon that the Harcourt Star had been appraised as not the Harcourt Star at all. He said the stone in that niche was an imitation." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Lady Rosalind's face drained of colour. "That is impossible," she whispered. "Impossible." Poirot's moustaches quivered, not with shock, but with something like restrained satisfaction. "Ah," he said gently. "And so we come to the crime that refuses to make sense. A man dead without violence, a jewel stolen that may not be real, a room too perfect, and everyone, I think, with something to hide." He turned to Jap, his voice still mild, but the air had changed. It was as though invisible threads had tightened. "Now, my friend," said Poirot.
"And we begin." Poirot moved first to the velvet-lined niche, bending so close that his moustaches nearly brushed the empty hollow. He did not touch it. He merely looked as one looks at a face that has lied. "Madame," he said to Lady Rosalind, "you saw the stone there before supper? At what hour?" "A little after 7. I came in myself. It glittered, quite unmistakably." "And you showed it to Sir Alistair?" "Yes, he admired it. He spoke of Antwerp buyers. He said it would change everything." Poirot's eyes went to the secretary. "Monsieur Lorne, you say he told you it was an imitation? When?" "Yesterday, at 5, Edwin said, anxious behind his spectacles. "He said the cut was wrong, the water wrong. He said someone had played a clever trick on her ladyship." Jap gave a snort. "If it was fake, why steal it? Or when why kill the man?" Poirot turned to him, politely reproachful. "Because a fake is useful, my friend. It covers the absence of the real. And men do not die for nothing. They die for money, for fear, for pride, for secrets." He crossed to the desk. A brandy glass stood there, half-emptied, its rim faintly clouded. Poirot sniffed it, then set it down as carefully as if it were evidence and not hospitality. "Who served this?" he asked. "The tray was laid out earlier," Lady Rosalind said. "Sir Alistair often helped himself when he worked late." "And last night he worked late," Poirot murmured. "Alone, they say." "Alone," Japp repeated. Footman heard a sound, but no one went in until morning. Door locked from inside, key in the lock. "Then let us speak to the footman," said Poirot. Carter entered, stout, pale, determinedly respectful, and he kept his eyes fixed on a spot beside Lady Rosalind as though her face might accuse him. The silence around him felt heavy. "You heard a thump?" Japp said. "Tell Monsieur Poirot." "It was about 12:30, sir. I was in the corridor. I heard a sound, like a chair struck. I went to the door, listened. No voices. I knocked and asked if Sir Alistair required anything. He answered, 'Sir?' He answered. I blurted, 'Yes, Captain,' or 'No, thank you,' he said. Sounded annoyed like." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "The door remained locked?" "Yes, sir. I tried the handle. Wouldn't budge. I went away." Poirot looked down at Sir Alistair's composed face. "So, at 12:30 he speaks. The doctor places death between midnight and 1. That is possible. But now, Carter, who had reason to be on this floor at that time?" Carter hesitated. "Oh, most were downstairs, sir, but Miss Violetta went up for her fan. Mr. Grenville, Lord Harcourt's cousin, said he had a headache and went to the first-floor smoking room. And Mrs. Grafton, the housekeeper, she passed me, checking the linen." Lady Rosalind's chin lifted. "Mrs. Grafton was doing her duty?" Poirot bowed. "I accuse no one, madame. I arrange the facts." He dismissed Carter, and before Japp could protest, removed the key from the lock. He held it between thumb and forefinger, examining it as a jeweller examines a stone. "There are fresh scratches," he said softly. "Not the slow scratches of years, but the hurried scratches of one night." "A key gets scratches," Japp retorted. "Bien sûr, but a careful household does not." Poirot replaced the key, then went to the window and drew back the curtain a fraction. The latch was down, the sash sat tight, yet on the sill lay a faint scattering of grit. "Hastings," he said. "Dust?" "Sand," he corrected, "as from a garden path, yet the window is not opened. Again, this affair refuses to make sense." Lady Rosalind's composure cracked at last. "Monsieur Poirot, if the stone was false, where is the real Harcourt star, and why is Sir Alistair dead in my house?" Poirot regarded her, and I saw that curious blend of gentleness and steel. "Madame, the first question is, who first knew the star was not there? Knowledge is power. Last night some believed the diamond sat in its shrine. Some believed it was to be sold, and at least one person, if Sir Alistair spoke the truth, believed it had already been replaced." Edwin Lorne made a choking little sound, and Poirot's hand rose to silence him without unkindness. "Japp," Poirot said, "where was Lord Harcourt when Sir Alistair was last seen alive?" "With the guests," Japp replied, "dancing, looking bored. Now he's furious and demanding we keep it quiet. And Miss Violetta, a singer, pretty, tears on demand, says Vale promised to back her." "And Mr. Grenville?" "Debts," Japp said grimly, "and charm enough to borrow more." Poirot nodded once, as if placing each name on an invisible board. "Then we shall speak to them one by one. In such a game, the first move is often a lie." At that moment, quick steps sounded in the corridor, and Mrs. Grafton appeared, her cap askew, her face pinched with urgency. "Lady Rosalind," she began, forgetting propriety, "forgive me, but there is something missing from your jewel cabinet besides the star." Poirot's head tilted. "And what is missing, madame?" Mrs. Grafton swallowed. A small bottle. Not the smelling salts, the other. The one marked Digitalis." For a fraction of a second, no one spoke. The word seemed to hover in the air. Digitalis, green, bitter, and deadly in excess. Digitalis, repeated Japp sharply. You keep that in the jewel cabinet? Mrs. Grafton flushed. It is kept in the locked compartment beneath, sir. Lady Rosalind has a weak heart. The doctor prescribed it years ago. Only a few drops are ever taken. Lady Rosalind drew herself up. It is true. The bottle is small, dark glass. I have not needed it in months. Poirot's gaze had sharpened to a fine point. And who possesses the key to this cabinet, madam? I do, and Mrs. Grafton has a duplicate. Only for emergencies, the housekeeper interjected quickly. Japp's eyes went to the brandy glass on the desk. Doctor said no usual poisons.
Aye, but if he wasn't looking for digitalis... Poirot raised a gentle hand. Let us not gallop ahead, my friend. Digitalis is subtle. It can mimic the natural failure of the heart. Sir Alistair falls, perhaps makes a sound. The thump Carter heard. He speaks once more, then collapses. It is possible. I felt a chill. Then the locked room is nothing more than a stage. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. But the stage was arranged by whom? He turned to Mrs. Grafton. When did you last see the bottle? Yesterday afternoon, about 4. I dusted the cabinet. It was there. And the cabinet was locked afterward? Yes, monsieur. Poirot inclined his head. Then we must examine it. The jewel cabinet stood in Lady Rosalind's private sitting room, adjacent to the study. It was a delicate piece of French workmanship, gilt edges and mirrored interior.
Far too ornate to conceal anything so prosaic as medicine. The lower compartment, however, was plainer, its keyhole discreet. Lady Rosalind unlocked it with steady fingers. Within lay a velvet tray with several small cases and an empty space where, by the faint circle in the dust, a bottle had rested. Poirot crouched slightly, his eyes level with the compartment. "No disturbance," he observed. "No hurried rummaging. The bottle was taken deliberately." Japp frowned. So someone knew exactly where it was. Precisely. Poirot rose and regarded Lady Rosalind thoughtfully. "Madame, who besides yourself and Mrs. Grafton knows of this medicine?" "Only Edwin," she said after a moment. "He once fetched it for me when I felt unwell, and my cousin Henry Grenville. He was present when the doctor discussed my heart some years ago." "And Sir Alistair?" Poirot asked quietly. Lady Rosalind hesitated. "He may have known. We were old acquaintances." Poirot nodded. "Then our circle narrows." We returned to the study. The body had not been moved. It lay with the same unnatural composure, as if death had been invited and politely obeyed. Poirot examined the brandy decanter now, lifting it to the light. "Japp, has this been tested?" "Not yet." "Then it must be, and the glass as well. Digitalis has a bitterness, but in brandy perhaps masked." He set the decanter down and turned suddenly to Edwin Lorne. "Monsieur, you told us Sir Alistair confided that the diamond was false. Did he say what he intended to do?" Edwin swallowed. "He said he would speak to Lady Rosalind after supper. Isn't he seemed troubled?" "Troubled by the deception?" Poirot prompted. "Yes." "Or by the opportunity?" Edwin blinked. I do not understand." Poirot's voice remained mild. "If the star in the niche was false, then the true diamond was already gone before last night. Someone had substituted it. To expose that fact would create scandal, perhaps ruin. It would also reveal a theft already accomplished." Japp's expression shifted. "You're saying the murder might have nothing to do with stealing the stone last night?" "I say only that the sequence of events may not be what it appears. First, the diamond is replaced by an imitation. Then Sir Alistair discovers this. Then he dies. Meanwhile, the false stone disappears as well."
It is like removing a hat from a hat that is already gone. Hastings, though I could see the logic forming like a pattern in embroidery. So the killer might have wished to silence Sir Alistair before he could reveal the substitution. Exactly, mon ami. At that instant Lord Harcourt entered, pale with suppressed fury. Inspector, how much longer will this circus continue? My house is in uproar. Poirot bowed slightly. It will continue, my lord, until order is restored. Harcourt's gaze fell on the body, then flicked away. Alistair was my friend. And your broker, Poirot said softly. You stood to benefit from the sale of the Star? Of course, we all did. The estate requires funds. Debts? Japp asked bluntly. Harcourt stiffened. Temporary inconveniences. Poirot watched him with a look almost compassionate. My lord.
Where were you between midnight and 1? In the ballroom until 12. Then I escorted Miss Violetta to the terrace. After that I retired. Ask anyone. We shall, Poirot replied. As Harcourt withdrew, a constable entered hurriedly with a small object wrapped in cloth. Inspector, this was found in the ash bin outside the servants' entrance. Japp unwrapped it. Inside lay a dark glass bottle, its label smudged but legible. Digitalis. The cork was missing. A thin residue clung to the inner glass as though hastily emptied. Japp let out a low whistle. Well, that settles it. Poisoned. Non, said Poirot quietly. It suggests poisoning. It does not settle who or why or how the locked room was contrived. He took the bottle gently, examining its mouth. No cork. That is careless. Or urgent, I suggested.
Or deliberate, Poirot corrected. He turned to Mrs. Grafton. Who has access to the ash bins? Servants, of course, but also anyone who slips through the side corridor. Poirot nodded. Then our murderer not only administers the poison, but disposes of the evidence where it may be found. Why? To direct us? To simplify the narrative? Japp looked exasperated. You think someone planted it? I think, said Poirot, his eyes gleaming, that someone wishes this crime to make sense. He glanced once more at Sir Alistair's composed face, then at the locked door, the orderly desk, the faint sand upon the sill. But it does not, he added softly. And that is why it is interesting. Poirot handed the bottle back to Japp with the delicacy of a man returning a borrowed opinion. You will, of course, have it examined, he said.
We must know how much remained, if any, and whether its contents correspond to the prescription. Japp nodded. Doctor's already on his way back. Excellent. Meanwhile, Poirot continued, we shall proceed with the living. The dead, I fear, will not contradict us. Miss Violetta was shown into the morning room, where the light softened her pallor and lent her an air of tragic refinement. She was younger than I had expected, dark-haired, with eyes that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. Whether the tears were genuine or rehearsed, I could not at once determine. You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot? She asked, in a low voice that trembled like the final note of an aria. If you please, mademoiselle. Only a few questions. You retired early last night? She clasped her hands. Not early. I danced until midnight. Lord Harcourt was most attentive. And after midnight? I felt chilled. I went upstairs for my fan. I passed the study. The door was closed. Did you hear anything? She hesitated. Voices, perhaps. I am not certain. Voices? Japp interjected sharply. Only a murmur. I assumed Sir Alistair was still working. Poirot's gaze did not waver. A man's voice or a woman's? A man's, she said quickly. Low, irritated. Did you recognize it? She lowered her eyes. It could have been Sir Alistair's. Could have been, Poirot repeated softly. And yet, you are unsure. She flushed. The house was full of echoes. Indeed, and when you returned downstairs? Lord Harcourt was waiting. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, mademoiselle. When she had gone, he tapped his finger lightly against his lips. She is afraid, he murmured. Of being suspected? I asked. Of something, he replied. Fear leaves a pattern, Hastings, like frost upon a pane. Next came Henry Grenville, a handsome man with an ease that seemed almost insolent. He greeted Poirot with a faint smile. I suppose you'll be asking where I was, he said lightly. You anticipate me, monsieur. That is thoughtful. Grenville shrugged. I had a headache, too much champagne. I went upstairs about 12:30. I never passed the study. And did you sleep soundly? Poirot asked. Like a child. Children wake often, Poirot observed mildly. Grenville's smile thinned. If you're implying, I imply nothing, I collect. Then collect this, Grenville said. Alistair Vale was not the saint you all imagine. He had a taste for risk, investments that failed.
Yet he pressed Rosalind hard about the sale. Pressed her? Poirot's eyes sharpened. He needed the commission urgently. Ah, Grenville's gaze flickered just for a second toward the door. Poirot noticed. I saw it in the slight tightening of his shoulders. When Grenville left, Poirot remained still as though listening to the echo of his footsteps. Urgency, he said softly. Financial strain, and the knowledge of a false diamond. Are you thinking Vale substituted the stone himself? I asked. It is possible. Discover the imitation, replace it with another, and blame the household. Confusion breeds opportunity. But then why is he dead? Poirot smiled faintly. Because perhaps he was not the only one who understood the value of confusion. The doctor arrived, brisk and indignant. He confirmed that digitalis in sufficient quantity
could induce sudden cardiac arrest indistinguishable from natural failure, unless specifically tested for. And was it? Poirot asked. The doctor hesitated. No, there was no reason. There is now. As the doctor departed to oversee the necessary analysis, Poirot returned once more to the study. He stood at the window again, studying the faint grit upon the sill. Hastings, he said, when you look at this room, what do you see? A man dead of poison in a locked room. And nothing more? I frowned, forcing myself to observe, as he did. The desk was orderly, the letters aligned, the rug undisturbed. The key remained in the lock. The room is too tidy, I ventured. Precisely. When a man realizes he has been poisoned, if he realizes, there is agitation. A glass overturned, a chair displaced. Yet here, everything lies composed, except for the thump Carter heard. Exactly. He crossed to the fireplace and crouched, examining the hearthrug. The thump was heard at 12:30. Carter knocked. Sir Alistair answered. So at that moment he lived. Unless, I said slowly, someone else answered. Poirot's head lifted sharply. Très bien, Hastings. But the door was locked. Yes, locked. And yet we have scratches upon the key and sand upon the sill. He rose, his eyes alight now with quiet intensity. What if, he said, the room was locked after the death? What if the voice Carter heard was not Sir Alistair's? What if the thump was not the fall of a body, but the movement of furniture? My pulse quickened. Then someone was inside. And left, Poirot finished softly. At that moment a constable entered again. This time visibly shaken. Inspector, there's been another development? Japp looked up sharply. What now? The false diamond, sir. We've found it. Where? Lady Rosalind demanded from the doorway, her composure fraying. In Mr. Edwin Lorne's desk, the constable said, wrapped in paper, hidden in a ledger. Silence fell, thick and electric. Edwin Lorne, who had been standing near the mantel, went white as chalk. I've never seen it, he stammered. Poirot's gaze rested on him with unsettling calm. Ah, he said quietly, now the game becomes interesting. Edwin Lorne stared at the constable as though the words had struck him physically. That is impossible, he whispered. My desk is locked. I alone have the key. Japp's expression hardened. We found it in the second drawer beneath the correspondence files. False stone.
Oh, velvet backing, everything. Care to explain? I cannot, Edwin said hoarsely. I swear it. Lady Rosalind looked at him with something deeper than suspicion, hurt. Edwin, you have been in my service for 5 years. And loyal every day of it, he replied desperately. I would never... Poirot raised a hand, stilling the rising voices. Calmly, if you please. Monsieur Lorne, when did you last open your desk? Last night, before dinner. I placed some letters inside. And this morning? I have not touched it. Who else could access it? No one. It is in my private office. Japp cleared his throat. Door wasn't locked when we checked. Edwin flinched. I must have forgotten. Or someone wished it to appear so, Poirot interjected gently. He turned to the constable. The drawer showed signs of disturbance? No, sir. Everything neat. Neat, Poirot echoed softly. He regarded Edwin with that curious, penetrating gaze which seemed less an accusation than a weighing of the soul. Monsieur, if you had wished to conceal this imitation, would you have placed it in so obvious a location? Edwin blinked. No, of course not. Just so? Japp folded his arms. You think it's planted? I think, Poirot said carefully, that it is convenient. He requested to see the stone. It was brought, glittering under the morning light with a brilliance that seemed almost defiant. Even I, no expert in jewels, could see that it was impressive. An imitation? I murmured. A good one, Poirot replied, but perhaps not good enough. He held it close, turning it slowly. If Sir Alistair discovered it false, he must have examined it closely.
Why then did he not remove it at once? Why wait? To confront Lady Rosalind, I suggested. Perhaps, or to bargain. Lady Rosalind stiffened. You imply he intended blackmail? I imply only that knowledge of deception creates leverage. Japp looked from the stone to Edwin, and if the secretary knew Vale had discovered the switch, he might wish to silence him. Edwin shook his head vehemently. I knew nothing of any switch until he told me yesterday, and I told no one. Not even Lady Rosalind? Poirot asked softly. Edwin hesitated. He asked me not to. A faint shadow crossed Lady Rosalind's face. Poirot replaced the stone upon the velvet and stepped back. Monsieur Lorne, at 12:30, where were you? In my room. I retired early. Did anyone see you? No. Did you hear the thump? I thought I did. But I assumed it was the wind. Poirot nodded slowly, then turned to Japp. May we inspect Monsieur Lorne's office? The room lay at the end of a narrow corridor, modest but orderly. The desk stood against the wall, drawers aligned with meticulous precision. Poirot crouched, examining the lock. No scratches, he observed, unlike the study door. Japp frowned. You mean someone forced the study and not this? I mean, said Poirot, that the marks upon the study key were recent, perhaps made by a second key. A duplicate? I asked. Possibly. He opened the drawer where the stone had been found. The papers lay in tidy stacks. Poirot lifted them one by one, as though each sheet might whisper. Everything arranged, he murmured. Too arranged. He closed the drawer gently and stood. Japp, has the laboratory reported on the brandy? Preliminary word. Traces of digitalis in the glass. Strong enough to kill. And in the decanter? None. Poirot's eyes brightened. Ah. So someone dosed his glass directly, Japp concluded. That narrows it to whoever was in the room with him. Or whoever had access to the glass before he drank, Poirot corrected. We returned to the study. Poirot stood over the body once more, his gaze lingering on Sir Alistair's gloved hand. "Hastings," he said quietly, "observe. One glove removed, one still worn. Yes. A man drinking brandy removes both gloves. It is a gesture of comfort. Unless he was interrupted, I suggested. Or unless," Poirot said, bending slightly, "the glove was replaced." He touched the black leather lightly. "See, the fingers are not fully drawn, as though placed upon a hand already stiffening." A chill ran through me. "You think he was already dead when the glove was put on?" "I think," said Poirot, rising, "that someone desired him to appear as he had been before." At that moment Mrs. Grafton appeared once more, visibly agitated. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, there is something else Carter has remembered." Poirot inclined his head. "Memory is often tardy but useful. What has he recalled?" "He says that when he knocked, and Sir Alistair answered, the voice sounded strange, as if strained, and—" she faltered, "as if the words were spoken close to the door." Japp swore under his breath. "Someone standing right there." "Precisely," Poirot said softly. "And if it wasn't Vale," I breathed, "then it was the murderer." Poirot's gaze swept the room, the window with its faint grit. The orderly desk, the locked door with its scratched key. "Yes," he said, "and that murderer was calm enough to answer, to wait, and then to arrange." He folded his hands behind his back. "But why," he murmured, "plant the false diamond in Edwin's desk? Why discard the bottle so carelessly? Why create a narrative so tidy that even the police might accept it?" Japp looked at him sharply. "Because he wanted it believed." "Exactly. And when a story is too eager to be believed, it is false." Lady Rosalind stood pale but resolute. "Then Edwin is innocent?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he looked toward the corridor where the other members of the household waited in uneasy clusters. "Madame," he said quietly, "I believe the time approaches when we must gather everyone together. Oh, there are questions that demand witnesses." His eyes gleamed with that familiar, controlled intensity. "The crime refuses to make sense," he added softly, "but it is beginning to speak." Within the hour, the principal members of the household were assembled in the drawing-room where, only the night before, laughter and music had disguised far subtler tensions. The lilies had been removed. The windows stood open to admit a pale winter sun that showed every face with merciless clarity. Sir Alistair's body had been taken away. In its absence, the room seemed curiously unbalanced, as though the crime itself still occupied a chair among us. Lady Rosalind sat upright upon the settee, her gloved hands folded. Beside her stood Lord Harcourt, restless and tight-lipped. Miss Violetta occupied a delicate chair near the fireplace, her dark eyes watchful. Henry Grenville leaned against the mantel with studied ease. Edwin Lorne remained slightly apart, pale but composed by sheer effort. Mrs. Grafton and Carter hovered discreetly near the door. Poirot placed himself in the centre of the room, not theatrically but naturally, as though gravity required it. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began gently, "I thank you for your patience. We are confronted by three problems. First, the death of Sir Alistair Vale by digitalis administered in brandy. Second, the disappearance of the true Harcourt star. Third, the appearance of its imitation in Monsieur Lorne's desk." A ripple of unease passed through the group. These problems, Poirot continued, are not separate. They are one. Lord Harcourt made an impatient gesture. Surely the facts are plain. Toulon discovers Vale has learned of the substitution. He panics. He poisons him. He hides the false stone badly. Edwin flinched, but said nothing. Poirot shook his head slightly. If Monsieur Lorne were so foolish, my lord, he would not have survived 5 years in your household. A faint murmur followed. Let us return, Poirot said, to the timeline. At 5 o'clock yesterday, Sir Alistair informs Monsieur Lorne that the diamond in the niche is false. He intends to speak to Lady Rosalind after supper, yet after supper he does not. Instead, he retires to the study. Perhaps he wished to verify it again, Violetta suggested softly. Perhaps, Poirot agreed. Now at 12:30, Carter hears a thump. He knocks. A voice answers from within the locked room. That voice, we now know,
It was strained and close to the door. He let the implication settle. Meanwhile, he continued, Miss Violetta passes along the corridor. She hears a murmur, possibly 2 voices. Violetta stiffened. I said I was not certain. Indeed, uncertainty is often revealing. Poirot turned his gaze to Grenville. Monsieur, you retired upstairs with a headache. Did you by chance require medicine? Grenville's expression hardened. No. You did not enter Lady Rosalind's sitting room? Certainly not. Yet you knew of the digitalis kept there. Grenville shrugged. Everyone in the family knows of Rosalind's heart. Poirot nodded. And Sir Alistair? He may have. Poirot paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. The poison was in the glass, not the decanter, therefore the brandy was poured first, and the digitalis added afterward. And Sir Alistair drank. He felt the effect. He may have risen, thus the thump. He may have attempted to reach the door. And the murderer, I said quietly, answered Carter. Exactly. A silence followed, taut as wire. Now, Poirot said softly, we consider the locked door. The key bears fresh scratches. This suggests a duplicate key was used, either to enter or to leave. Japp, standing near the window, nodded grimly. We're checking all keys in the house. Poirot inclined his head, then faced the assembled group once more. There remains the question of the diamond. If Sir Alistair discovered it false, who substituted it, and when? Lady Rosalind spoke, her voice steady despite the strain. The star has been kept in that niche for months. Only for private viewings was it removed. And who arranged those viewings? Poirot asked gently. Sir Alistair, she admitted. He brought potential buyers, quietly. Poirot's eyes flickered. Then he had frequent access. Harcourt bristled. You cannot suggest... I suggest nothing yet, Poirot said calmly. I observe that Sir Alistair alone benefited from exclusive handling of the stone. If he substituted it earlier, he might later discover the deception and create scandal to conceal his theft. Edwin looked up sharply. You mean he planned to blame us? It is a possibility. Violetta's gaze darted from one face to another. But then why kill him? Because, Poirot said quietly, someone else discovered his plan. A tremor passed through the room. He intended to expose the imitation after supper, Poirot continued, perhaps to accuse, perhaps to demand silence, but before he could do so, he was silenced. By whom? Harcourt demanded. Poirot's gaze moved slowly across them all, resting briefly, almost imperceptibly, on each face. By the one who stood to lose the most from exposure. Grenville laughed shortly. That could be any of us. Just so, Poirot agreed. At that moment a constable entered and murmured something to Japp, who nodded and stepped forward. We've confirmed, Japp said.
that a duplicate key to the study exists. It was made 2 weeks ago by a locksmith in town, ordered under the Harcourt account. A murmur broke out. "Who collected it?" Poirot asked. "Signed for by Henry Grenville." All eyes turned. Grenville's composure faltered for the first time. I ordered it because the old key stuck." "And did you inform Lady Rosalind?" Poirot inquired mildly. "No." "Where is this duplicate key now?" Grenville hesitated. "In my room." "May we see it?" Grenville's jaw tightened. "If you insist." Poirot inclined his head. "I do." As Grenville left the room under Japp's watchful eye, Poirot remained still, his expression unreadable. "Hastings," he murmured softly. "Observe how the pieces arrange themselves. The duplicate key, the knowledge of the poison, the urgency of debt, and the fear of scandal." "Then it is Grenville," I whispered. Poirot's moustaches twitched faintly. "Mon ami," he said, "it is never so simple as the first arrangement of pieces." He turned back to the waiting household, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "We approach the moment," he said quietly, "when this crime, which has refused to make sense, I will be compelled to do so." Henry Grenville returned within minutes, Japp close behind him. In his hand he carried a small brass key attached to a plain leather fob. His expression had resumed its composure, but there was a stiffness about his shoulders that had not been there before. "There," he said curtly, placing the key upon the occasional table before Poirot. "The duplicate, perfectly innocent." Poirot did not touch it at once. He bent slightly, studying it as though it were an insect pinned for classification. "Innocent?" he repeated softly. "That depends upon its employment." Japp picked it up. "We'll compare the scratches." "Please," said Poirot. While Japp and the constable withdrew to make the examination, the room held its breath. Grenville remained standing, arms folded, and Lady Rosalind watched him with an unreadable expression, part anxiety, part something sterner. Poirot turned gently toward him. "Monsieur Grenville, you say you ordered this key because the original stuck?" "Yes." Yet Lady Rosalind did not complain of such inconvenience. She would not concern herself with such details. "And yet you did." Grenville's lips tightened. "I manage practical matters." "Such as debts?" Poirot asked mildly. A flush rose beneath Grenville's tan. "My finances are my own affair." "Alas," said Poirot quietly, "when finances intersect with murder, they become ours." Before Grenville could retort, Japp returned. He held both keys between finger and thumb. "Scratches match?" he said bluntly. "Recent marks on both. Looks like they've been used in quick succession." A low murmur ran through the room. But Grenville's composure faltered. "That proves nothing. I may have tried both keys when the lock stuck." "At 12:30? Poirot inquired gently. "I was in my room." "And yet," Poirot continued, Carter heard a voice answering from within the study. A voice strained and close to the door. "That was Vale?" "Was it?" Poirot's tone remained almost conversational. Miss Violetta heard murmuring, possibly two voices. If Sir Alistair confronted someone about the diamond, might there not have been an argument? Violetta shifted uneasily. Grenville's gaze flicked toward her, swift, involuntary. Poirot noticed. "Ah," he murmured softly. Lady Rosalind rose abruptly. "Henry, if you have anything to explain—" "I have nothing to explain," he snapped. Poirot raised a placating hand. "Let us consider calmly. Sir Alistair discovers the diamond false. He intends to speak after supper, Perhaps he approaches someone first, someone he suspects. Me? Grenville demanded. Perhaps, Poirot replied. You have debts. You knew of Lady Rosalind's heart medicine. You ordered a duplicate key, and the poison is administered in a glass, not the decanter, suggesting personal contact. Grenville's face had grown pale beneath its colour. This is absurd. Is it? Poirot asked softly. Or is it merely uncomfortable? The tension in the room was almost tangible when suddenly Edwin Lorne stepped forward. Stop, he said hoarsely. All turned to him. I cannot endure this. Monsieur Poirot, there is something I did not mention. Lady Rosalind stared at him. Edwin? He swallowed. Yesterday evening before dinner I saw Sir Alistair and Henry arguing in the corridor, but I heard the words exposure and ruin. I thought it concerned the sale. I did not wish to intrude. Grenville rounded on him. You eavesdropping little— Enough, Japp snapped. Poirot's eyes rested on Edwin with renewed interest. Why did you withhold this information? I feared it would appear I was diverting suspicion. Ah, Poirot said quietly. Fear again. He paced once more, slowly. So, Sir Alistair quarrels with Monsieur Granville. Later, he retires to the study. He drinks brandy, the poison is added, he collapses. The murderer answers the knock, the door is locked. The key scratches are made. He paused, turning toward the window. And yet, he said softly, there is the sand upon the sill. All eyes followed his gesture. The window was closed, Harcourt said impatiently. Closed when we found it, Poirot corrected.
But not necessarily closed earlier. Grenville let out a sharp laugh. You suggest someone climbed out like a burglar in a melodrama. I suggest, Poirot replied, that when a crime appears too neat, one must look for the disorder concealed beneath. He crossed to the window and unlatched it with care. The sash rose smoothly. Outside lay the narrow ledge overlooking the garden path below, a path covered in pale gravel. Observe, Poirot said. If one were to step out and drop lightly to the path, a trace of grit might adhere to the shoes. Later, that grit might be carried back in. Grenville's voice was strained now. This is fantasy. Is it? Poirot asked. At that instant, Mrs. Grafton gave a small gasp. Sir, look! She pointed to the hearthrug. Near its edge, almost invisible against the pattern, lay a faint crescent of pale grit.
Old Japp crouched. Matches the sill. Silence crashed down. Grenville's breathing had quickened. Poirot's voice remained soft, but inexorable. The murderer poisons Sir Alistair. He waits. He answers Carter to buy time. Then, instead of using the door, where he might be seen, he opens the window, steps onto the ledge and drops to the garden path. Later, he re-enters the house by another entrance. The door remains locked from within. Hastings, myself, felt the brilliance of the construction even as dread mounted. But the diamond, Lady Rosalind whispered. Poirot turned slowly. The false diamond planted in Monsieur Lorne's desk was a final stroke, designed to fix suspicion upon the convenient suspect. But it required access not only to the stone but to his office. He looked directly at Grenville. And access to both, he said quietly. Was yours? Grenville's mask cracked at last. You have no proof, he breathed. Poirot's eyes gleamed, not triumphantly, but with a grave certainty. Not yet, he said, but we are very close. Grenville's hand tightened on the mantel until his knuckles whitened. You build castles in the air, Monsieur Poirot, he said, though the bravado rang hollow. A few scratches, a little dust, and you hang a man? Poirot inclined his head. No, monsieur, I hang no one. I illuminate. He turned to Japp. Before we proceed further, may I ask whether the laboratory has completed its analysis of the bottle recovered from the ash bin? As a matter of fact, Japp replied, producing a folded paper from his pocket, they have. The bottle contained digitalis, yes, but not recently poured. The residue suggests it had been nearly empty for some time. No fingerprints clear enough to identify. A faint ripple of confusion moved through the room. Nearly empty? Hastings repeated. Precisely, said Poirot softly. And yet the glass contained a lethal quantity. Japp frowned. Meaning? Meaning that the poison in the glass did not come from that bottle. A stunned silence followed. Lady Rosalind gripped the back of a chair. But my bottle was missing. Just so, Poirot replied. Removed to create the appearance that it had been used. Grenville's eyes flickered, quick, calculating. Poirot continued, his voice calm and even. The true source of the digitalis must be elsewhere. A more concentrated preparation, perhaps. One not kept in Lady Rosalind's cabinet. The doctor, who had remained discreetly near the window, spoke up. Digitalis in medicinal form is diluted, but in certain tonic preparations, used for animals occasionally, it can be stronger. Poirot turned sharply. Animals? Racehorses sometimes receive cardiac stimulants, the doctor said cautiously, though it is irregular. All eyes shifted, almost involuntarily, to Grenville. His family estate, I recalled suddenly, included a small racing stable. Grenville's face drained of colour. You cannot prove, he began, but the words faltered. Poirot's gaze held him. Last night, Sir Alistair confronts you, he said quietly. He has discovered that the Harcourt star in the niche is false. Perhaps he suspects you of having substituted it earlier during one of your frequent visits to Lady Rosalind's sitting room. You, burdened with debt, see an opportunity months ago and take it. Replace the diamond with an imitation. I wait for a discreet sale to occur, but Sir Alistair, who handles the stone for appraisal, discovers the deception. Grenville's breathing grew uneven. He threatens exposure, Poirot continued. Not from virtue, perhaps, but from leverage. He presses you. Perhaps he demands repayment of certain obligations. Perhaps he intends to reveal the truth after supper. Violetta made a small, frightened sound. You cannot know this, Grenville whispered. Poirot's eyes did not leave his face. You go to him in the study. You bring brandy, or perhaps he has already poured it. You add the poison brought with you from your stable supplies. He drinks. He feels the effect. There is a struggle, brief, contained. He falls. The thump Carter hears. You realize the servant is outside. You answer, imitating Vale's tone. To gain time. Grenville's composure shattered. It was not like that, he burst out. He goaded me, said he would ruin Rosalind, ruin us all. He wanted money, more money. He was bleeding us dry. Lady Rosalind stared at him in horror. Poirot's voice remained soft. So you silenced him. I did not mean to kill him, Grenville cried. Only to frighten him, make him ill, delay him. I did not know the dose. You knew enough, Japp said grimly. Grenville's gaze darted desperately around the room. And the diamond? Poirot prompted gently. Grenville laughed, a broken sound. Yes, the diamond. I took it months ago, replaced it with the imitation. I thought no one would notice until after the sale. Then Vale discovered it. He wanted his share. When he collapsed, I panicked. I locked the door, used the duplicate key to leave later, and went out the window when Carter knocked. I returned by the side entrance and planted the imitation in Monsieur Lorne's desk, Poirot finished. Grenville closed his eyes. Yes, he was the obvious suspect. He handled the correspondence. It would have ended there. And the bottle in the ash bin? A diversion, he muttered. I took Rosalind's empty bottle to make it appear simple. A theft and a poisoning. Straightforward. Poirot regarded him steadily. "You see, mesdames et messieurs," he said quietly, how carefully the crime was arranged to make sense. A missing bottle, a planted diamond, a locked room, all designed to guide us to a convenient conclusion. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. But the little grey cells rebelled. The poison in the glass did not match the bottle. The glove was replaced upon a dead hand, and the scratches upon the key spoke of haste, and the sand upon the sill, that betrayed the escape. Grenville sagged as though the last thread had snapped. Lady Rosalind sank slowly into her chair, her face white with grief and disbelief. "You have destroyed us," she whispered. Grenville looked at her helplessly. "I meant to save us." "By theft," Poirot said gently. "By murder." Japp stepped forward, his expression grim but not unkind. "Henry Grenville, I must ask you to come with me." Grenville did not resist. As he was led toward the door, he turned once more toward Lady Rosalind, but she did not meet his gaze. When the door closed behind him, the room seemed to exhale. Poirot stood very still, his expression grave. "The crime," he said softly, "has at last consented to make sense." For several moments after Grenville's removal, no one spoke. The winter light had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the drawing-room carpet, as though the house itself recoiled from what had been uncovered within its walls. Lady Rosalind remained seated, her gaze fixed upon nothing. The composure that had sustained her since morning had cracked, leaving in its place something more human, fatigue, sorrow, and a dawning comprehension of betrayal. "I did not see it," she said at last, her voice low and steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Not the debts, not the resentment. I thought Henry merely careless." Poirot inclined his head gently. "We see in those we love what we wish to see, madame. It is a kindness, and sometimes a danger." Lord Harcourt exhaled sharply. "And the true Harcourt star? Is it lost beyond recovery?" Poirot turned his attention to him. "On the contrary,
I believe it is nearer than we imagine." A flicker of hope crossed Lady Rosalind's face. "When Monsieur Granville confessed," Poirot continued, "he admitted to substituting the diamond months ago, but he did not state where he concealed the original." Japp, who had just re-entered the room after ensuring Grenville was secured, nodded. "We'll search his quarters, his rooms at the estate, and the stables." Poirot raised a hand slightly. "Yes, but before that, consider the psychology. A thief who steals under pressure of debt may intend to sell immediately. Yet Grenville did not. Why? He feared exposure," Harcourt muttered. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he required a buyer discreet enough to avoid scrutiny. Sir Alistair would have been ideal." A quiet understanding dawned.
You think Henry intended to sell the true diamond through Vale," I said slowly, "while allowing the imitation to be sold publicly?" "Exactly, Hastings. A double deception, the imitation sold to satisfy appearances, the true stone disposed of privately." Lady Rosalind's hands tightened. "Then Vale's discovery destroyed his scheme?" "Indeed, and forced him into desperation." Japp cleared his throat. "We'll find the stone." Poirot's eyes had grown thoughtful again, as though a final thread tugged at his mind. "There remains one small matter," he said softly. All looked at him. "The glove." Japp frowned. "The glove?" "Yes. Sir Alistair's left glove removed, the right replaced after death. It suggests that when Monsieur Granville administered the poison, Vale had already removed both gloves to drink comfortably. After the collapse, in haste, Grenville replaced only one, perhaps to restore the appearance of order And failed, I murmured. Precisely. Violetta, who had remained silent through the revelation, now rose uncertainly. Then it is over? She asked faintly. Poirot regarded her with a look that was almost kind. For you, mademoiselle, I hope so, but scandals have long echoes. She lowered her eyes. Mrs. Grafton stepped forward hesitantly. Monsieur Poirot, may I ask if Carter had not remembered the strange tone of the voice? Would you still have found the truth? Poirot smiled faintly. Oui, madame. The crime protested too loudly, the planted bottle nearly empty, the imitation placed so conveniently, the scratches upon the key. When a narrative presents itself fully formed, one must ask who composed it. Hastings, myself, felt a familiar admiration stir within me. And the sand? I asked. The sand was the whisper, Poirot replied. Almost nothing, yet enough. Japp glanced toward the window. We'll check the garden path for prints. Perhaps, Poirot said lightly, though by now they will tell us little more. The confession has rendered them unnecessary. Lady Rosalind rose slowly, drawing herself upright once more. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steadier now, you have spared my household a greater injustice. I thank you. Poirot bowed with quiet dignity. I regret only that the truth brings pain, madam, but falsehood would have brought worse. A servant entered discreetly to announce that the motor car stood ready to convey Grenville to the station. The finality of it seemed to settle over the room like dust. As the household began to disperse, some to weep, some to whisper, and some to avoid one another's eyes, I remained by the window beside Poirot. It was nearly perfect, I said. Non, Hastings, he corrected gently. It was clever. Perfection lies not in complexity but in harmony. Monsieur Granville introduced too many notes, each designed to direct suspicion. But when every clue points in one direction, it is rarely the right one. And the diamond, I persisted. Poirot's gaze shifted briefly to the mantel, then to Lady Rosalind's writing desk. Did you notice, he said softly, that when Monsieur Granville confessed, he spoke of replacing the stone months ago, but he did not mention removing it from the house? No. And a man so cautious would hesitate to transport so valuable a jewel unnecessarily, especially while under debt and scrutiny? My pulse quickened. You believe it is still here? Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. I believe, mon ami, that before this day ends, the Harcourt star will shine again. He adjusted his cuffs with characteristic precision. For though the crime has at last made sense, he added quietly, there remains one final act of order to restore. Lady Rosalind had not yet left the drawing-room when Poirot approached her once more. Madame, he said gently, may I trouble you for a few moments in your sitting-room? She looked at him with weary surprise, but nodded. Of course. I followed as they crossed the corridor, the same corridor along which so many deceptions had quietly passed the night before. The jewel cabinet stood where we had left it, its mirrored panels reflecting a room that felt both familiar and newly altered. Poirot closed the door softly behind us. You believe the Harcourt star is still in this house? Lady Rosalind said, watching him. I do. But Henry confessed. To substituting it? Poirot finished. Yes, but confession does not always include every detail. He approached the cabinet and regarded it thoughtfully. Madame, when the stone was shown to potential buyers, it was removed from the niche? Yes. And replaced afterward? Always. By whom? Usually by Sir Alistair, occasionally by Henry, if Alistair was occupied. Poirot nodded slowly. And you never handled it yourself? Rarely. I trusted them. Just so. He opened the cabinet once more and examined the velvet-lined niche. His fingers hovered just above the fabric, but did not touch. "Hastings," he said quietly, "observe the impression." I stepped closer. There, faintly visible against the velvet, it was the outline of the stone's setting, a shallow indentation worn by repeated placement. "But that matches the imitation," I said. "Does it?" Poirot murmured. He produced the false diamond, which Japp had temporarily entrusted to him. Holding it carefully, he lowered it into the niche. It sat slightly askew. "Ah," Poirot breathed softly. Lady Rosalind leaned forward. "What is it?" "The indentation," he explained, "is fractionally deeper on the left side. The imitation does not sit as the original would have." He lifted the false stone and handed it back to me. "If Monsieur Granville substituted the diamond months ago, the velvet would have adjusted to the imitation's weight and shape. Yet the indentation suggests the original remained here far longer." Lady Rosalind stared at him. "Then Henry lied?" "Not entirely," Poirot said gently. "Yet he replaced the stone, but perhaps not months ago." He straightened and crossed to Lady Rosalind's writing desk. "Madame, may I?" She nodded. Poirot opened the top drawer, scanning its contents with swift precision. Papers, sealed letters, a small silver letter opener, and beneath them a flat leather case. He lifted it. Lady Rosalind's breath caught. "That is merely correspondence." "Is it?" Poirot asked softly. He opened the case. Inside, nestled in folds of tissue, lay a diamond whose brilliance seemed to ignite the dim afternoon light, the Harcourt star. For a moment none of us spoke. Lady Rosalind swayed, gripping the edge of the desk. "But how?" Poirot closed the case gently. "Monsieur Grenville," he said quietly, "was indeed the thief, but he did not dare remove the stone from the house. Instead, and he concealed it in a place beyond suspicion, your own desk. A thief often hides the treasure where it will not be searched." "And the substitution?" I asked. "Recent," Poirot replied. "Very recent. When Sir Alistair began to press for sale, Grenville realized he could not delay longer. He replaced the original with the imitation only days ago, intending to retrieve the true stone once the false sale was complete." Lady Rosalind sank into a chair, her composure dissolving into shaken relief. "Then Alistair discovered the switch immediately," she whispered. "Yes, his trained eye would notice at once. He confronted Grenville, and events unfolded as we have seen." She looked up at Poirot, tears glinting but unshed. "You have restored more than a jewel, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "Order, madame." "Only order." Japp entered at that moment, summoned by a discreet message from Poirot earlier. When shown the diamond, he gave a low whistle. "Well, I'll be hidden in plain sight." "Precisely," Poirot said. As Japp departed once more to amend his report and ensure the stone's secure custody, Lady Rosalind rose slowly. "I shall arrange for it to be placed in the bank vault at once," she said firmly. "Never again in a niche for admiration?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A wise decision." The house, though still burdened by scandal, seemed lighter as we made our way back toward the entrance hall. The winter sun had begun to fade, leaving a pale gold wash across the windows. At the door, Lady Rosalind paused. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, you have my gratitude." Poirot bowed deeply. "Madame, human nature is a labyrinth. Sometimes one requires a small compass." As we stepped into the waiting motor car, Hastings, that is, I, glanced back at the grand facade of Harcourt House. "It nearly succeeded," I said quietly, "if not for a little sand." Poirot adjusted his gloves with fastidious care. "Not the sand alone, my friend. It was the refusal of the crime to be simple. Monsieur Granville wished to create a story the police would accept readily, but truth is seldom eager to be convenient." He settled into his seat, moustaches immaculate despite the day's exertions. "Remember this, Hastings," he added softly as the motor car began to move. "When a crime insists too loudly upon making sense, it is because someone has composed it so." "And you?" I asked. Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "I prefer the quiet logic of the little grey cells. They, at least, do not lie." With that, Hercule Poirot leaned back, serene once more, as Harcourt House receded behind us, and the restored order of the world, fragile, imperfect, but intact, returned to its place. The following morning, London wore its habitual expression of indifference. The newspapers carried discreet notices of Sir Alister Vale's sudden death, couched in language suitably respectful and suitably vague. There was no mention of digitalis, nor of imitation diamonds, nor of a desperate cousin led away under quiet arrest. Poirot and I sat in our flat in Whitehaven Mansions, where the symmetry of the furniture and the exactitude of the breakfast tray proclaimed that whatever chaos had briefly intruded upon the world, order had here reasserted itself. Hastings, that is to say, I, could not resist returning to the affair once more. "Ah, it was the simplicity that deceived us," I said, stirring my coffee. A poisoned glass, a missing bottle, a planted stone, each detail pointing so plainly toward lawn. Poirot adjusted the angle of a teaspoon by a fraction of an inch. "Just so. The crime presented itself as a tidy narrative, and that, mon ami, was its greatest flaw." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Observe the progression. First, the supposed theft of the diamond. Second, the convenient discovery of the imitation in the secretary's desk. Third, the missing bottle of digitalis belonging to Lady Rosalind herself, each element constructed to satisfy expectation. The police would see motive, means, and opportunity aligned neatly in Monsieur Lorne." "And yet," I said, "the very neatness offended you." "Mais oui, because human beings are rarely neat in desperation. Monsieur Grenville was clever but not harmonious. He introduced too many guiding lights. The planted bottle was nearly empty. The poison in the glass did not match it. The glove was replaced imperfectly. The scratches on the key betrayed haste. And the sand spoke of a path not intended for observation." He smiled faintly. "It is often the smallest discordant note that reveals the false composition." I considered this. "And Sir Alister?" I asked. "He was no innocent." Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. "Non, he was prepared to profit from discovery. When he realized the diamond was false, he saw opportunity. He would expose the substitution only if it benefited him. Thus he approached Monsieur Granville, not out of loyalty to Lady Rosalind, but to secure advantage." "And misjudged the man." "Precisely." Poirot rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the ordered geometry of the square below. Monsieur Granville's tragedy lay not in his debt, but in his pride. He believed himself capable of managing deception indefinitely. When confronted, he sought to regain control through further arrangement, poison, staging, misdirection. "He nearly succeeded," I said, quietly. "For a time," Poirot agreed. "But deception requires balance. Too little, and it collapses. Too much, and it reveals itself." He turned back toward me. "And Lady Rosalind?" I ventured. "She must rebuild her household and her trust. The Harcourt star is secure, but the greater loss is confidence in those she believed loyal. That is the deeper wound." There was a pause. "You spoke, at the end, of crimes that insist too loudly upon making sense," I said. "Do you always distrust simplicity?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I distrust eagerness, When evidence rushes forward to accuse, it is wise to ask who has summoned it. True guilt does not arrange itself so helpfully. He resumed his seat, smoothing his cuffs. The locked room, for example. It was not meant to be a mystery, it was meant to discourage inquiry. Impossible, one would say, and thus accept the simplest explanation. But you never accept the simplest explanation, I observed. I accept the most consistent one, Poirot corrected gently. Simplicity is admirable, but only when it arises naturally. I laughed softly. And what of Monsieur Lorne? He owes you much. He owes his innocence to himself, Poirot said. Fear made him hesitate to speak of the quarrel he witnessed. Yet fear is understandable, it is human, it is not criminal. And Violetta? She saw more than she wished to know. That too is human. He poured himself a final cup of coffee with meticulous care. Hastings, he said after a moment, there is a temptation in such cases to admire the ingenuity of the criminal, but one must not. Ingenuity applied to selfish ends corrodes the spirit. The true admiration belongs to order restored, not merely the recovery of a jewel, but the exposure of falsehood. I regarded my friend with the familiar mixture of admiration and affection. You speak almost philosophically. Poirot permitted himself a small smile. Perhaps, but philosophy is only logic applied to the soul. He rose, adjusting his jacket with precision. The affair at Harcourt House, if we may so call it, will fade from gossip, or yet for those involved it will remain a lesson. A lesson in what? That when a crime refuses to make sense, Poirot said softly, it is because someone has laboured too hard to make it so. He picked up his hat, immaculate as ever. And the little grey cells, Hastings, never forget, they prefer truth in its natural form. It may be untidy, but it is always harmonious. With that, Hercule Poirot stepped out into the London morning, composed and exact, leaving behind him a world once more aligned, not by force, but by understanding.